I'm told that the system is up and ready. Thank you so much for the very intense work and the look on your face to get us up and ready. We have had a brief recess because we were unable to continue to stream to the public. And again, I appreciate everyone's patience with this. I'm going to repeat where we left off, that there's been an extraordinary 19 tax preferences are sunsetting before July 1 in 2026, which would be before we could have a regular session bill in the upcoming session. Therefore, and this is important to a number of people following Finance Committee, we will hear an omnibus bill extending all but one of them, and that one would be the standard deduction, which will be heard separately for 1 year, which will allow the Senate and House Joint Subcommittee to evaluate tax preferences, which has become reactivated this year after about 5 years without meeting, to review and make recommendations on all of those tax preferences that are sunsetted. We'll also, at that same meeting, be hearing all bills sunsetting the standard deduction and individual bills that extend or eliminate a sunset will be also scheduled for that meeting. I do not know at this time whether that's going to be full committee or whether it will be sub 3. We are still trying to deal with the calendar dates that we have available. Now, finally, and this is where I appreciate the patience and the ability to continue to stream to the public. We're at a major junction in tax policy. I'm going to be brief. I was going to be originally, but I'm trying to be even briefer. But it's important for the public and for you as members of the House Finance to have a grasp of certain basic facts that will affect the challenges that this tax committee will need to deal with. Now, before you, you have 3 documents that I'll briefly go through to give you context for the significant challenges ahead due to federal deadlines and their effect on Virginia. We are going to be projecting those for the public to see now, but they will also be linked to the website so that the public does have access to these 3 documents. If we could bring up the first one, please, which is entitled The Federal Outlook on Impact on Virginia. And I'm waiting for it to be projected. The piece before you actually was prepared in its entirety and presented to the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee in November 21st. I've selected certain slides from it that I think quickly bring us up to date on this. Certainly, again, as I introduced Kristen Collins, the Deputy Commissioner of Tax Policy for the Department of Taxation, was one of these presenters. Anything that you see with Tax Department is something that she presented. If we can then flip to the next one, please. This introduction to the federal outlook and impact to Virginia, I want to emphasize particularly on this is I have added the highlighting that the TCJA, which is the Tax Cuts and Job Acts, which was enacted at the very end of calendar year 2017, many of the deadlines will expire at the end of calendar year 2025. And so many of them have to be extended. However, we may also be seeing on the federal level additional tax actions. So as we turn to the next slide, what I want to make sure that everyone understands, both the public, and again, I know we have several new members on this committee, that as it expires, the Virginia is a conformity state, which means that unless we take specific action, many of the actions at the federal level ripple directly to Virginia. So we will need to be very aware of, and we will be at the mercy of that particular calendar of Congress and the new administration. And I also want to point out another aspect that I have highlighted, that Virginia's standard deduction increase in refundable earned income tax credit also expire at the end of this calendar year 2025, both of which are directly related with the federal government, because in Virginia, if you take the standard deduction on the federal tax, which last that I read, virtually everybody now does after TCJA raised it so high. In fact, I heard that 90% of filers do the standard deduction. You have to take the standard deduction on Virginia's income tax, even though our standard deduction is substantially less than the federal, which is now, due to inflation, almost at $30,000 for a married couple, and ours is at $17,000. In addition, I want to point out that to extend just the expiring individual TCJA provisions, the deficit would increase, according to the Congressional Budget Office, $4.5 trillion over the next decade. The next slide, then, very basically underscores what I have already covered about conformity. We do have rolling conformity, which was passed by this committee last year, but it will be a real test to see how it actually works under the stress of the number of changes that may occur in the federal code, rather than, if I can say, business as usual. The next slide, if you will, just highlights then some of the TCJA provisions that are at stake. Notice the individual provisions all have to be reenacted. The standard deduction, the mortgage interest deductions, itemized deduction changes and limits on loss of non-corporate taxpayers. Notice that there are business provisions that are permanent, that will also affect how our tax and structure reacts and our revenue. Going to the next slide. That this points out that during the 2019, as I indicated, the General Assembly enacted a tax policy package to address the TCJA, which incorporated the following. We increased the standard deduction. We had a one-time individual tax rebate because there were winners and losers in Virginia as to who got a tax break and who didn't, and who got a total tax break, even though it may have changed in Virginia. In addition, we deconformed as far as the state-local tax deduction limit on the real and personal property tax, and we deconformed from the limit on itemized deductions and kept it at the same level, which I think was about at AGI of about $350,000, if I recall correctly. We also dealt with the deduction of interest for businesses and subtraction for global intangible low tax, which I came to know as GILTI, which is a great acronym, under the TCJA permanent. Now, turning to the next slide then, in addition to that, affecting our whole income tax structure, we have continued to increase the standard deduction. As I indicated, it now is at, I believe it's actually $8,500 for singles and at $17,000 for joint returns. We've also made the pass-through entity tax, refundable. And in addition, we've also dealt with the earned income tax credit, which I meant to say, actually, that was the comment about it being refundable. So those were also major changes. The refundability of the earned income tax credit now is for approximately 40% of the amount of money that goes to all tax credits now is about 40% of the EITC. Turning to the next slide. This brings you up to what we're at. So State, please listen to national news, as I'm sure you all do. We do a lot of driving, and my Sirius radio bands are set to a lot of commentary, because we're going to hear a lot in this during this winter and into the spring about what's going to be done on the federal level with all of the proposals, especially following our November election. And so then moving ahead, if Congress acts, Virginia's got to respond accordingly. And I bring that up this year because doing anything, we have to be aware of this upcoming, if you will, surge in anything that we consider about changes this year as we're in this particular climate. And turning then to the next slide. Just making sure that you also understand, however, that right now, extension of all federal and Virginia provisions are assumed in the budget document that is being worked on by appropriations. Then the final one, again, rushing through, I just wanted to highlight some of the proposed provisions, some of which I know that you will have heard that are being talked about that might be additional, and that is to lower the corporate tax rate, eliminate green energy subsidies, change the federal rates or tax credits, exempt income from individual income, things like exempting Social Security, which Virginia already does. That's a place where we deconform. Exempting overtime pay, which would be a loss of about $200 to $300 million in Virginia revenue. Increasing the federal child tax credit, and also removing or modifying the caps on the deduction for state and local taxes. That then is a very quick overview, but again, you have the full slides, and don't hesitate to reach out to, particularly as I indicated, our Deputy Commissioner to ask for further questions. We can go to the next one. This is a cheat sheet that I am providing for you that I needed to do to, as I said, I'm learning every day, and hopefully I will keep on learning, so all of us need to hopefully understand that complexity. This next cheat sheet is the Virginia adjusted gross income and how it is determined from the federal adjusted gross income. You will see on the piece before you that it gives you the code sections, but it basically says that we start with the federal adjusted gross income, and then we have a number of deductions for age, as I indicated, for Social Security, because the feds tax Social Security, Virginia does not, for unemployment, military retirement, because we enacted the military retirement credit in this last couple of years, plus a number of other items that are in it. And also I would point out to you that code sections stipulates that no tax is imposed below a resulting Virginia adjusted gross income of $11,650 or $23,300 for joint returns. Partly that is because this is nickel and diamond. It's going after very, very small taxpayers. I will indicate to you in round numbers, essentially about 55% of Virginia taxpayers, Virginia adjusted gross income is under $50,000. About 75% is under $100,000. Is what you are talking about after you make all of these changes. And then also note the next code section, 322, that we've got a number of deductions and add backs that are also part of determining what your taxable income is as far as Virginia taxes, and that includes things such as personal exemptions and foster child exemptions and prepaid tuition contracts. And also I would note on this page, Governor Youngkin's proposals would add to this an amount equal to cash tips as well as car tax credit would all come at this point in determining what your Virginia tax obligations are. And now moving to the final handout. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I do want to flip the page on this. My apologies. I forgot that I had the other side. Also, what I have included here are just excerpts from something that appeared in the press, but this just gives you a cheat sheet when you look at what the federal brackets are and what Virginia brackets are, as well as making sure that you're all aware that since the federal government can go into deficit, all of the federal brackets and standard deduction and all of these items are regularly inflated for inflation. Every year they go up, and that's what this article is pointing out. Whereas in Virginia, we have to balance our budget, and we have not indexed these items, which is one of the reasons why we have seen that kind of gap that grows with inflation. And finally, you will also then see other details on the estate tax, the tax-free gifts, and the earned income tax credit, as well as SALT and the child tax credit, to give you that history. Now, turning to the final handout, and I will not be going through this page by page, but I know as I saw this a couple of weeks ago, and I hope that I would encourage you all to get your information from a number of sources. The agenda of this group, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, may or may not be the agenda I agree with, but I have on all points, but I have found their data to be extremely valuable, as I have a number of other tax foundation and other data that is available. And I found this presentation of the top 13 fiscal charts of 2024 to be excellent as far as really laying out the challenge that is ahead of all of us as Virginia citizens and as U.S. citizens, as far as looking at what makes up the federal deficit, what makes up federal spending, which is the debt thermometer, contains a lot of good fine print detail there on the Social Security Fairness Act, for example, and all of the components of that debt. Turning the page, you will see a number of charts that have to do with how it has grown. Turning the next page, other indications of how and why the deficit has grown. Also, I'm going to now skip through the next page, the same types of growth with good text. Again, this will be available online for people to print out and read the detail, just as I would encourage you as members of this committee to read. But if I may turn then to keep on going, the next one. That one. And now, just to make sure that you're aware of the challenges that we have as we deal with the campaign that we've just gone through, all of the issues that have been talked about as far as the projection, as far as the debt. And we certainly are aware of a number of voices that are concerned about the growing debt, and you can there see comparisons for the Trump administration and what happened in the Biden administration, what was talked about by Vice President Kamala Harris as candidate, what was talked about by President Trump as candidate, and what we are talking about as far as the deficit. And also the final page is headlined, "The TCJA extension won't pay for itself," and so we have additional debt that will be added. I wanted to make sure that you were all aware of this context, because it very definitely sets a challenging table of how we go through what otherwise might be just a great idea, but we have a number of things that are all in play during this next year. I thank you all for your great patience on this. I wish that we had time for discussion, but unfortunately, because we lost the stream, we are unable to do so. Again, stay tuned for what our docket will be in the coming meetings. As we all, again, saying to the public, it is challenging to make up for the 3 days lost in being able to schedule all of the bills. If there are no further questions or comments, thank you so much, and thank you to the Courts Committee for accommodating us, and again, particularly for Tech for making sure our system got up and working for the public. Meeting is adjourned.